17 votes. Got the recorder going. Brad beat Andy by only 17 votes in the absentee count. But he's plagued by these ethics problems. They keep piling up. And just wanted to hear your perspective on that. Like, all these candidates who have ethics problems keep getting elected in this town, and like, you got bumped out of the primary. You know, the Boy Scout gets bumped out. So what's your perspective on that? Is this a town where people don't care, or a town where people are misguided? What's your take on it?
Well, first of all, let me say I'm disappointed because Andy Champ Duran would have been an asset to the city council. He would have offered transparency, a breath of fresh air, and he actually would have been a zealous representative of not only his ward constituents' interests, Robbie, but the city at large in a very fair, objective manner. That being said, what's the matter with the city? Did they care? I'm going to have to speculate that in the instance that you're talking about, they don't. They've been misinformed, they've been duped, and this is unfortunate, but this is what Team Noble is all about. He was a big supporter of the Noble team, and which is an example of nepotism and no transparency in government. What really concerns me is that Mr. Will was found guilty of an ethics violation and fined $1,000, but Jimmy Noble, the president of the city council, the uncle of the next incoming mayor, refuses, per an order of the ethics board, to issue a reprimand to his peer, Mr. Will. That is outrageous. It shows no transparency, no independence. It shows no regard for the law that was adopted passed by 9 members of the city council. But it doesn't surprise me because Mr. Will was part of a group with Mr. Dunn who excluded his category of profession from any disclosure. So what happens? So now Mr. Duran runs. Mr. Duran, okay, in good faith, okay, complies with local law. Mr. Will, on the other hand, is totally oblivious to the requirements under the ethics law, and a week later comes in and represents the Irish, the AOH for the Irish Cultural Center down on Abeale Street before the planning board. And it's disgusting that 1 week after he's found guilty and the president of city council is issued an order requiring that he reprimand Mr. Will engages in the same conduct that violated the law a week prior. And it really is very interesting because the Hibernians, connected to Kevin Cahill, the assemblyman who indicated that he's going to try to get $2 million for their cultural center. As I suggested, he might want to include some of that money for the Latinos and the Italians who also want a community center here in this city. But he's part of that. So I think that what happened here too is that it was recommended that Brad will, represent the Hibernians, now that Noble was elected mayor, because the assemblyman is connected to the Hibernians. He's connected to also Team Noble because he gave them $2,000 or $3,000, for the primary campaign. So what do you have? You have Brad Will being reelected irrespective of ethics violations, irrespective of connections to a group who are being favored by a local assemblyman, appearing before the planning board, assuming being compensated for his work, on the heels of a violation the week prior, found guilty. I would agree with you. Do the voters of the 3rd Ward care? Do the voters of the 3rd Ward, are they aware? Do the voters of the 3rd Ward, do they think, or are they totally oblivious to the fact that this does not bode well for open, transparent, fair government for everyone? And given the fact now that the president of city council still refuses to issue a reprimand for the first violation, and a new mayor coming in, it's very well likely that the charge that was filed by Mr. Duran will go nowhere in the next administration.
So Andy filed additional charges with the ethics board.
Correct.
I was unaware that there was an outright refusal. I thought maybe it was just a lapse. I know that he had 30 days to do it, right?
He has made no effort nor no public assurances. So I'm calling Mr. Noble, President of City Council, out. Are you going to do what's required under the ethics law and issue that reprimand per the order of the ethics board? That's the question for Mr. Noble. It's already been 2 weeks this week.
Has he formally refused? Or
he has not formally made any public statement assuring this. As a matter of fact, initially early on, when this matter was before the ethics board, he publicly stated at a meeting that he will ensure that he gets his guys in the council on board with this to support Brad. He made that public statement, at a meeting, prior to Mr. Will being found guilty of the initial violation for voting on the Pike Plan, which he was an architect, a part of that project, and paid for his services.
Are you familiar with this new bankruptcy allegation?
It's my understanding that Mr. Will filed a petition in bankruptcy. That's correct, and that I'm not necessarily sure with what your question is, but
he allegedly stated on the Chapter 13 filing, claimed that his primary residence is in Bearsville. I haven't been able to verify that yet, but it's on Richard Cahill's blog, and Rich is saying that you could invoke Burns versus Sotile and have him removed.
I'm aware of what you're talking about. However, the debtor's residence is listed as Bearsville, as you state, in the petition. The question becomes, what's his domicile? Okay? So if in fact, he resides, if it's not, it's my understanding he resides on Fair Street in the ward at his mother's residence. Is that his domicile or his residence for purposes of voting and register to vote here in the city of Kingston? Does he reside there, all the time? And it's my understanding he does. So the petition, I'm not going to state that in fact, he misrepresented his debtor's residence, because that point of the application, the petition, would require the debtor's residence and what you're filing your bankruptcy for, that particular asset. So I don't know where that's going, but certainly I do believe people could be cynical and suspect and say, hey, wait a minute here now. You're filing a petition for bankruptcy. Your residence is listed there as the debtor in Bearsville. You just ran here for your second term, listing your residence here on Fair Street, which is your mother's home. Please explain. So that's a question I think Mr. Will should fairly and objectively respond to.
Well, he declined to comment, but do you think that the doctrine of estoppel could prevent him from trying to claim that he does live in the ward if he filed a federal claim saying he doesn't?
Oh, he's got a problem, yeah. I mean, he's got a problem. He committed a sham and a fraud. That's a real problem under federal law with regard to the bankruptcy proceeding. Yeah. The question becomes, if he declined to comment, you might want to follow up, Robbie. Why are you declining to comment? As the mayor said, you legitimately if you live on Fair Street, if that's your domicile now, that's where you vote, no problem. If on the bankruptcy petition you had a list, the debtor's residence, of the property and issue that you're filing in bankruptcy for, you see what I'm saying? Then explain the difference. Then that's what you're doing, Mr. Will. So the question I have for Mr. Will is, what are you hiding, Mr. Will? What do you have to hide, Mr. Will?
Well, this issue comes up, I'd say in a decade. It comes up maybe a handful of times, half a dozen times throughout the Hudson Valley. And you can play around with where you live as far as voter registration. But once you start filing elsewhere contradictory documents, it opens up a can of worms if you're a public official. And it depends where and how and what your intentions are and where you intend to stay in the
That is
long
correct. Correct. There is an issue of intent. You're correct. Under the public offices law, for him to substantiate, okay, being an elected official here in Kingston, you're correct. The petition says Bearsville. Is your intent to reside there? Or was your intent, okay, once you vacated and now you moved in at your mother's residence in Fair Street, is that your domicile, Fair Street? And is basically your mailing address in Bearsville just a formality for purposes of the petition because you still have a connection to that asset? Where's your intent to live? Where's your intent to live? I hear you. That's a question, though. Those questions simply should be a follow-up, in my opinion, to Mr. Will's refusal to simply answer a question. You have on this petition a different address. You're now an elected official in Ward 3, City of Kingston, zip code 12401, at your mother's house. That's your mother's house, Mr. Will. Please advise.
Do you think the filing date is October 19th for the bankruptcy? Do you think this might have anything to do with the Pike plan to protect them from fiscal liability for this very expensive lawsuit that's looming on the horizon?
Let's just say that it would certainly be suspect. And I think it would be fair that anyone looking at Mr. Will's timing would agree. Why are you filing it now? Okay, why at this point in time? And as to the issue of what you're talking about, Mr. Will was the architect who stamped the final approval of the Pike Plan Canopy project, but he worked with another architect. So the pleading is going to, I would think, identify architect, contractor, and subcontractor, and then let those parties, fight amongst themselves as to who the real culprit was with regard to liability of the negligence alleged with that project and the outcome.
One last question, and I appreciate taking the time on such short.
It's an interesting question, though, why he did file now, and the people in the third ward, the city at large, should really ask that question to Mr. Will. Why are you filing now?
Transition. What's going on with the transition? I talked to Steve last night at the committee meeting, the Finance and Audit Committee, and I said, is there a transition in place? Is there a committee, a transition? Is there anything going on between the Gallo administration and your transition? He said, no, there isn't. Has anyone from the mayor-elect?
No, and there will be none. There will be none. The manner in which Mr. Noble, conducted himself during the campaign, the lack of transparency, the hateful attacks, the defamation, the attacks on department heads, the criticism, and then after he prevailed in the primary, saying he's going to continue what my administration started, he's going to continue the record of accomplishments that have been achieved through the partnership I fostered with the help of the department heads and the employees in this city. He's made no effort to reach out to me after the primary. He's made no effort to reach out to me after the general election. And that's probably because, Robbie, the people who helped put him into office, the Satiles, the Hoffes, the Landys, the Donaldsons, the Cahills, the Wills, the Dunns, have their own agenda. And they have their own ideas about who will be working down here and in what capacity. I mean, there's all kinds of rumors of what role Hoffe and of what role Satile's going to play and Dunn's going to play. And I'll leave that until after January, because that's the way it is. But in sum, Mr. Noble has made no attempt. And that's probably because of the fact that Mr. Noble would have to recognize that he owes this administration, Greg Swansea, and the entire city of Kingston an apology for the misrepresentation that he conveyed with regard to the Forsyth Park projects, specifically Kinderland, the fishing pier, And several of the grants that Mr. Swansea has had to now, for the past 3 months, work very diligently to obtain reimbursement. We're getting reimbursed for the Kinderland project because of Mr. Swansea's work, not Mr. Noble's work or Mr. Gilfeather. We're getting reimbursed for a grant that Mr. Noble was allegedly to have been working on for 3 years, 50% of the time, which was impossible. But Mr. Swansea was able to rework the budget and consequently get retroactive $75,000 towards Mr. Noble's salary. We're losing $92,000 on a grant where he was responsible for educating the public about recycling. So in sum, for all those reasons, how he came into office, who was behind him, what their agenda is with respect to what their goals are, and how they have not come to me to help facilitate any of that. I think that speaks volumes for his credibility, and I think also too, I think he recognizes, as a local media stated in their column recently, that he's got a lot of work to do to reunify the city, because he did not beat Polacco. Okay, I beat Mr. Polacco 2-1 4 years ago. I had a mandate. Okay, and my vision was well accepted. And 4 years later, the city is in a better position because of that partnership from that vision. But you put that aside, let's put it together. He not only has to figure out how he can make a transition from this administration to his, given what he's done and his supporters have done and their lack of good faith, but he's going to also have to get busy and go back out to seniors, vets, clergy, black, Latino, business professionals, not-for-profit, labor. He's got to get to all those groups and rebuild, the coalition, the partnership, and include all those stakeholders. So he has quite a bit of work to do, and you would have thought that after the primary, he would have reached out. You would have thought that after the general, he would have reached out. But given what I'm seeing and hearing in the chatter, social media, and who he has around him, they're prohibiting that. They're not letting that happen, for all the reasons stated.
So there is a transition team out there?
I have no idea. It's not my problem. My issue is to continue what we started, and at the end of the year, leave the next administration with, here are the files, here's where we're at with the projects. You do what you got to do now, because we're at this stage in terms of getting reimbursement. We're at this stage. We're at that stage out to bid. And now it's incumbent upon him to put the people in like I did, look at government, see where the budget has to be restructured to be able to make that happen. So I'm here just to ensure that the transition will continue all the hard work that this administration has undertaken, so that a year or two from now, when you call and you say, why wasn't this project finished? I have no idea. You got to talk to the current administration, because the current administration was given everything on December 31st that they need to continue the work.
They talked for an hour last night about the position that was cut in your budget. Environmental education program.
Yeah, you don't need it. We're the only city in upstate New York, and that I know in New York State, at a city our size, that has 2 environmental educators that cost the public almost $250,000, including salaries and benefits. The positions were created, due to the fact that the Nobles were related to Jim Noble, the president of City Council. They were the only 2 people, contrary to what Mr. Noble said, who took the exam in the entire city workforce and in the entire county, because civil service created the jobs to be qualified for only them. They were the only 2 employees who met the qualifications, Robbie, 8 to 10 years ago. The only 2 who took the test. There is no eligible list that they were appointed from, because there weren't 3 people. And you need 3 or more people to create an eligible list for the appointments. But they were appointed. That's no problem. That's consistent with the law. He was supposed to, as part of his appointment, and agreed last year when he was promoted by my administration and received an extra $6,000, he was supposed to be seeking ongoing funding to be reimbursed for his position so that it be sustained going forward because of the cost of the salary and the benefits and whether we even need that position. He didn't do that. I gave you an example earlier. We were out in the last 3 years $160 some odd thousand that he was supposed to get reimbursed for doing work from grants, okay, that the city was awarded. Swansea just got $75,000 retroactive for 2 years to cover his salary. We're losing $92,000 retroactive 3 years that he wasn't able to submit because it's impossible, because you can't work 50% of the time on 3 grants for 3 years. So what Mr. Noble did was, the entire time he was in his position, was basically play a game. And when the money was awarded, by the way, he took credit also too for several grants that Steve Finkel, Lord rest his soul, was responsible for. That's outrageous. We just finished, okay, we're awarded money for a grant we received with an application he provided in 2000, I think it was 10 or 8. We just got reimbursed for it because of Mr. Swansea's work. So the discussion they had recently, it's just another example of how disengaged our city council is. They've been provided for the past several months several memos from Mr. Swansea outlining the grants that were filed by Mr. Noble that were never reimbursed, the reasons why, and all the work that Mr. Swansea had to do to get that money, to be in good standing with the federal or state funding agency. They're well aware of that. Ms. Mills knew that as well. Remember, they had a special meeting where Mr. Dunn blew up, and then the following month we had to have a police officer there to help restrain and keep order right there. So to take an hour discussion why we need 2 environmental educators, okay, when Steve Noble, okay, literally didn't deliver on what he was supposed to do, and how the city taxpayers have funded and foot the bill for 2 positions for 2 people in the same family who are related to the president of the city council, is literally just an example of how disconnected they are to the taxpayers and to the residents and the priorities that this city faces going forward. So my recommendation is leave it out of the budget for the reasons stated. You don't need to. His wife's position does get some reimbursement from the school district. You can't get them to do anything to connect Hodge with Rondout Center, the 2 positions. Okay, and quite frankly, at the end of the day, the council should have followed up with my office, Ms. Mills, or Mr. Toohey, and they should have reviewed all the memos that Mr. Swansea has been sending for the past several months, and they would see that that position has no value for the reasons stated.
You think Julie's still the only one who could take that position after Steve becomes the mayor?
She already has. Her position wasn't cut.
I'm saying, though, who's going to take Steve's position? Julie seems to be the only one qualified to take.
Correct. That'd be another issue. So if they reinstate the position, what are you going to do? You're going to put the mayor's wife in the position he vacated that the city doesn't need? That's the epitome of nepotism. And I think ethically, under the ethics law, no one's even raised the question about how this could even be done. How you could be mayor and have because technically he's going to be presenting a budget which affects his wife's salary. His uncle is going to preside over a body where he could possibly have to break a tie over a budget that's going to be paying his wife. It's just crazy if you think about it. It's just a no-brainer why, people would see that to be a problem.
You would think so one of them would have to resign under some kind of ethics, but because she's pre-existing, she has civil service protection. But she could always switch over to secretary to the mayor. That's usually what happens.
Correct. She could go right over there without a problem because that position serves at the pleasure and discretion of the mayor. That's the mayor's confidential exempt secretary.
But right now, basically, he's his wife's boss's boss. He's leapfrogged. They were co-workers, and now he's sort of her boss's boss. Mm-hmm. So how does that work?
You're going to have to ask these questions to him, his uncle, and the incoming court counsel. But our position is clear. It's not going to work out well. It's not transparent. It's not right. And the average person on the street isn't treated like that. I don't know how many... Where else in Kingston would you have an uncle and his nephew who are now the mayor and the president of the city council respectively? Other than in a third world dictatorship, which is common. Okay? Where else in Kingston now would you have the mayor who's the boss of his wife's boss? or that his wife would then be put in the position that he vacated, who would be his wife's boss assistant. It's just mind-numbing that this can happen. But this happened, and it gets back to what I said to you earlier. He did not have a mandate. He did not win with a margin. He only won by a few hundred votes. That means his vision was not accepted. His vision didn't unify. And that means, too, that people who didn't vote, okay, were upset about nepotism and the lack of transparency and the lack of independence between the executive and legislative branch. That's just the way it is.
Are you going to veto the budget if they put the position back in?
I'd have to look really, quite frankly, to see what the other circumstances are, that if they put other funding back in, if they took more from the fund balance, they're going to play all kinds of games. What they're hearing, what I'm hearing too, is Matt Dunn and Will want to ensure that Corp Council's budget includes a legislative council, which is just mind-numbing. So let me understand this. Uncle Jim's going to have his own lawyer. That's Jimmy Noble, president of the city council for those folks, the legislative branch. And then nephew, Steve, the mayor, is going to have his attorney. So I guess then what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to then hire an arbitrator, a referee, to referee and mediate the differences in opinions between the mayor's council and the legislative branch's council. Please. That's what they're talking about, though. So, answer your question, if they did something like that, I would seriously contemplate vetoing it. But why? I think it would be good entertainment to see the uncle and the nephew spar with the respective attorneys over different issues, okay, and see where it goes. But not to be facetious, the public deserves better. And it's a shame, unfortunately, that the city of Kingston is in these circumstances, Robbie. But we'll see.
And there's no sour grapes in here. There were allegations that this is political revenge or retribution because he beat you.
I just got done telling you, okay, from a business standpoint, I'm running a $40+ million business, Robbie. And when you have two positions that don't have the value based on not having the productivity, and they're contingent upon reimbursement to sustain their existence, and if it takes another city employee, a department head in this instance, to obtain the funding to reimburse for Mr. Noble's position that he was supposed to do 2 and 3 years ago, and then if we look at his track record with all of his grant work, I think it all underscores and justifies why are the taxpayers paying someone $50,000 plus benefits to do work that they're not doing and that costs the city money and polarizes the city from itself. That's not sour grapes. That's running government as a business, and that's what Team Noble doesn't like. Team Noble doesn't want to run government like a business. They want to run it for their crony elite friends and family. It's all about cronyism and nepotism, Team Noble. That's all it is. Brad Will is an example of that. Brad Will, okay, from Team Noble. You're here a week after an ethics violation representing someone. You're the liaison from the council to the planning board. You don't see any appearance or conflict there, Brad, without the ethics law in your face? And no, that's right, because Team Noble's all about ensuring that our cronies and our family can all benefit from business. We don't need a bid process. We don't need procurement. So it's not sour grapes. I represent, okay, the city, the residents, the taxpayers. We didn't collect $5 million in taxes, Robbie, in the last 4 years. We don't need to pay someone 50 plus benefits, 100,000 for a job. We need more laborers. We need more cops. We need more clerical. We don't need another environmental educator. You get no value in terms of providing services to the public. So this isn't sour grapes. This is looking at the big picture. What are the services? What are the costs? How are we going to provide that service to the public? And that's it. And obviously it isn't always accepted. But for anyone to look me in the eye as a business person, and I'm not collecting $5 million in taxes and putting 250 some odd people out of their homes this year in businesses, and then say we got to keep $100,000, which is almost a point on our budget and almost a point of the 2% tax cap, they're mistaken. Doesn't make sense.
But how could anyone sit there and say there must be something going on in the back of your head, like, yeah, you know, good for them because they're the only ones who got cut.
Who got cut? They both did. Just one position did. His position, for the reason stated, we're not generating the revenue. Okay? And I had to look at that like that across the board. We looked at various positions. I was looking at code enforcement, parking. They generate the revenue. Because people say, well, why don't you reduce them down to part-time, save some money, blah, blah, blah. Do this. This particular position. You got to look at the value and what it's actually doing, not only in terms of service, but what kind of revenue is it generating as well.
It's like 3.9% on the levy going up next year. How does that fall under the 2% cap? That thing I don't understand.
You got to talk to John Toohey about that, because it's a Star Wars formula where you're giving credit from the prior year going forward. Some of the costs that are increased are in the cap. Some of them are outside of the cap. So that's the most simple fashion that I can explain it to you. I mean, the first budget I had put together 4 years ago, similar question, I raised it to we contacted the state controller's office. They didn't give me the answer other than what I just shared with you. Oh, well, you get credit. Some of it's in the cap, some of it's out the cap. This is the way it's calculated. So the levy is this, the rate is that, but it's different than the cap, and that it looks like it's higher than the cap, but it's not. And it's just, listen, the bottom line is, okay, City of Kingston, in 2017, when those 3 union contracts expire, next year's preparation of the 2017 budget next summer, Mr. Noble's going to have a real tough time. He's going to have to put a minimum of $500,000 to $700,000 in contingency for the 2017 budget for the contract settlements. And I can't put them in 15 because the contracts don't expire until 17. So he's going to be in a situation where he's going to have to make some tough choices. 86 cents of every dollar is unfunded, Robbie. 76 cents is personnel. There's increase in health insurance, workers' comp, and risk insurance liability for the city. You have no control over it. It's usually about $600 to $700 a year.
It's all in your budget message.
Right. So if 2% of the cap is 150 each point, you do the math. So what are you going to do? Both candidates, now Mayor Noble in January, and then Polacco, the opponent, both of them stated at debate and elsewhere, we're lowering taxes. Good luck. There's nothing to cut. I've cut in 4 years hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're doing more for less, be it the city lab that we were paying for did not happen. We've collected back, with the Aaron settlement, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Settled contracts saved a lot of money, blah, blah, blah. There's nothing to cut. So where do you cut taxes? And this year, residents received a decrease under my administration. 4 years have been stable taxes. This year, next year, commercial are going down somewhat. In 17, you're not going to have that because there's nothing to cut. Revenues are flat, and you're going to have union contracts that you're going to have to settle.
Very interesting stuff. Well, you said a mouthful, Shayne, and I'll thank you again.
You can, whatever you need there, obviously you can cut and paste, but I think you were looking for the will stuff, and then the transition I think you got, and then the picture with some of these other things. But if you want to turn that off now, I mean, I'm a little taken back that Noble didn't say anything to you about, no, we're going to reach out to Shayne. They won't. They will not. They will not.